Hello there, this is Come Home America. I am your host, Nick Hankoff, and this is the podcast that narrates and navigates America's dual crises of identity and order. This is episode number 4, and the way I want to start off is just, first of all, before I even start, thank you so much to the new subscribers and to the likes and to the comments, and really going back years of encouragement from some of my best friends. All that really pushes me, especially the support I'm gaining now just on just a few episodes, but really truly going back a long time when I said I was going to do a podcast, and I kept waiting and maybe it worked out for the better. Maybe it's good that I'm starting now, right? But I bring all of that with me into every show, so that's how much I appreciate your support. So please do find me on social media. This is Come Home America. You want to search Come Home America with Nick Hankoff, because I ripped off the name from a bunch of things. But it is a unique show, and we are covering, what does that mean? The crises, the dual crises, because they're so closely linked, of identity and order. Well, America is a place where we don't know where we belong in the world. We don't know where we belong in relation to each other, to the institutions in the society. And right now there's a culture war going on for these institutions, for these places, for the identity of the country. And so, a lot of people have their own ideas of where to go. And here on this show, I'm going to be a little humble, draw a little back, and get more into where exactly I think we should go and where some are going wrong. But I think actually you won't have to wait long to get my perspective on a lot of that. But that is the conversation to be having now. It's not strictly Republican versus Democrat, or black versus white, or old versus young, although all of these distinctions in demography and politics are taking shape in the streets and in our politics and in the culture. There is something broader, something deeper, something more transcendent even, that I think is at the heart of this crack up of the society. And so let me preview the show here a little bit. I do plan on having guests on the show at some point, but for the first 2 episodes of the show were guest interviews. So if you want to check those out, I had Scott Horton on episode number 1, Michael Bolden on episode number 2. So, but for the next couple episodes here, just because there's so much going on to lay the groundwork for this election year, for whatever else is going on in 2020, I just want to do some monologues. And so the preview for tonight's monologue is, we are going to get into Trump 2020, and this show it's not aiming anyway to be a nationally based show. But as I said in the beginning, America used to be at least an organized set of places, places that came into conflict with one another, but resolved them in a regional fashion, or respect for the other in one of the regions, or 50 states, or a different town, what have you. The country had a more localist feel before, and I do want to highlight where there are still local issues and still local solutions to problems, but so much of our society is defined nationally, and especially in an election year, and that's fair enough. So we are going to talk a little Trump 2020 down near the end of the show. Also getting into the COVID-19 lockdowns and mandates and what we might expect regardless of who wins in November, but a ratcheting up rather than a ratcheting down, because of what we're seeing in Australia, of people's homes being invaded by the police just because of, you couldn't have a more mild post on Facebook than saying a peaceful protest with social distancing and wear a mask, and that still be so much against the law. Well, we'll get into the details of the consequences that these families are facing in Australia, and how we see that cheered on even here in America, and similar consequences in the United Kingdom, and how we might see that come to fruition here in the United States. But first, before getting into those big topics, I do want to nip in the bud from episode 3 some points on this this growing phenomenon of domestic terrorism. And half of the country will point to one side and say they're responsible for the domestic terrorism, while the other side will point to the other, right? Well, as I said in the last episode, we can go back certainly a long ways in history of domestic terrorism, but I think for the times that we're living in, really the farthest back we'd want to go is 9/11 for the context that we're living in now. And in 9/11, the scare wasn't domestic terrorists, of course. It was international terrorism coming to the United States. But that quickly turned into, oh, you're a terrorist sympathizer if you don't favor the U.S. Policies abroad and at home, the war on terror. And so from terrorist sympathizer, just a few years forward, we're leaping now to the Tea Party years under Obama, and that's where a real domestic terrorism charge was being leveled at people, which had before just been a very alien concept, except for maybe a lone wolf or something. But now we're starting to assign whole groups of people labels of domestic terrorism. And the Tea Party protests, of course, were always peaceful, but even more so they're seen as peaceful now if you're comparing them to what's going on now with the Black Lives Matter and Antifa riots that have been going on for months and months here in major cities. Now, what did you have? You had the Tea Party being called domestic terrorists just because they were open carrying or other scary things like being against Obamacare or whatever. That labeled you a domestic terrorist. And we move forward from that to, I guess, maybe Occupy Wall Street at some point was called a domestic terrorist group on Fox News. You had Black Lives Matter maybe being called domestic terrorists on Fox News. This is years ago, though, still. Back in 2015, the Black Lives Matter getting started. And, you have people running down the street chanting death to cops, kill cops, fry them like bacon, whatever. We all heard these clips, and so they were deemed domestic terrorists for chanting these slogans. They were slogans, right? And they were maybe insightful, maybe criminal. But again, it just seemed like this domestic terrorist charge was kind of, too much, and everyone maybe knew that this was political hyperbole. But now I think we're at a point where the domestic terrorist charge is going to stick, either rightly or wrongly. And so we have two events that popped off, Kenosha, Wisconsin, and Portland, Oregon, in the recent weeks. And Kenosha, Wisconsin was first. After several days of rioting, 17-year-old Kyle Rittenhouse, who works in Kenosha, is local to that area. He does live across state lines, which is like 30 minutes away, very short distance, actually. So, but he works in Kenosha. He had a rifle that had always been in Wisconsin. It had not crossed state lines, like some people said. But Kyle Rittenhouse was guarding a car lot that apparently was owned by a business owner who had 2 of his 3 businesses burned down and ruined by these riots. And so he wanted to protect his last business, and he called whoever he called, who then linked up with Kyle. Kyle is there with this group. And we see video footage of Kyle, attending protesters as a medic. He's a lifeguard, has some training. People will say he's not a real medic, but actually he has some training. He came there with supplies, wearing gloves, and we see him on video doing that. And we see that later on, Kyle, the riot police move in to a point where they block Kyle from returning to his group. We don't know exactly each step along this way, but suffice to say that Kyle had been separated from his group. He was all alone, but he was near, we have on video him near some car lot where people were destroying property, and someone apparently was upset with him. This gentleman named Rosenbaum, who then chased after Kyle, and we have Kyle fleeing, and the first gunshots that we hear out on video are not Kyle's, but some third person firing off some firearm. And Kyle turning around, and a mob is descending on him, including Rosenbaum. Firstly, Rosenbaum grabs his rifle. This is all in the police reports, witness accounts, so those are easy to find. And this is all very much in the open. You know, at the beginning, there was a lot of misinformation with any breaking event, especially a charged breaking event. But now the information is out there. We have Rosenbaum grabbing Kyle's rifle after Kyle is fleeing. Kyle's running away. So Kyle defends himself, shoots Rosenbaum in the head, kills him, stays on the scene to make sure Rosenbaum is attended to, calls a friend, says that he's just killed someone, and he flees again because the mob is descending down on him again. We have, you know, I think a lot of people know these steps, but I'm getting through them as quickly as I can. From there, Kyle is still running away from the mob, and someone comes up and hits him in the head, at least enough to knock his hat off and knock him off his step a little bit. Kyle does not turn around and use that as an excuse, even though he's been assaulted, to turn around and fire, you know, recklessly into the crowd. No, he continues fleeing for his life. How many people have been killed in these Black Lives Matter Antifa protests and riots and looting ordeals? I mean, to varying degrees or another, there's been nearly 36 dead. Either they've been burned down in arson attacks, people have died in arson attacks, or people have been straight up shot, or somewhere in the vicinity of the protest, or somehow the issue of Black Lives Matter entered into a dispute that ended up with someone dead for saying all lives matter, a woman saying all lives matter, being shot. I think that was in Indianapolis. But you have dozens of people dying around these protests, and they're still mostly peaceful. According to the same press, they called the Tea Party domestic terrorists just a decade ago. And Kyle is running. He's been hit. He's then tripped, and a man with a skateboard hits him on the head with a skateboard. Kyle defends himself, shoots that man. I believe that man was shot in the heart and lung and died. And people say, oh, an assault skateboard, like a skateboard versus a gun. And yes, actually, people have died from skateboards to the head. That's easy information you can look up and find. Now, so Kyle's in easily self-defense in those two cases. Finally, and right as he shot this man with a skateboard, a third man with a pistol, a semi-automatic handgun, comes up on Kyle. And actually hesitates. You know, the man with the gun hesitates, stops for a moment after he's witnessed Kyle shoot this other man for the skateboard attack. And Kyle pauses as well. Waiting to see what is this guy going to do. He's armed with a gun. I mean, this would be enough for Kyle to shoot him without hesitating. But clearly Kyle hesitates, and this man with the firearm hesitates. And then the man with the firearm charges Kyle, and Kyle shoots and wounds him in the arm, nearly blows his arm off. On Facebook, we see this man in the hospital getting his arm, tended to, and his friend who was there with him at the hospital comments on Facebook to say that his friend's only regret was that he did not empty his magazine into Kyle sooner. So clearly there was a threat there. And clearly Kyle acted in self-defense. And yet this is domestic terrorism. This is what we see people coming out and saying is a domestic terrorist. We have Facebook shutting down every post that defends Kyle Rittenhouse, including his lawyers. There's a trial going on now. He's charged with murder one. What more could you ask for? That charge is not going to go anywhere. I don't think we're that far gone in our criminal justice system that you would get charged with and convicted of first-degree murder, which means premeditated. I don't think we're that far gone, but yet those charges are brought. And I mentioned in the last episode that could be political in a sense, that the DA who brought the charges, not the cops, but the DA brought these charges. The DA would say, well, this is a political opportunity for me to stand up and take a side here. But he takes a side craftily in the sense that maybe he knows Kyle will easily get off on a murder one. He would get off just as well on any lower charge, but go for the high charge and go that way. And we'll see how that plays out. But nonetheless, you have a trial, you have murder one charge, and yet still that's not enough. You have to quit. You have to censor all of his support online, including from his lawyers and from people wanting to donate to his defense fund because the attorney's doing this pro bono. So this is really interesting because you could chalk it up to being, better safe than sorry. Maybe they think this will de-escalate things if we just don't talk about it and don't look at it, even though the young man, the 17-year-old Kyle, has been been allowed to be trashed online, been allowed to be called a domestic terrorist, a Nazi, a white supremacist. And as a matter of fact, protests that day, and still to this day, I'm sure, but we have on video from that day, Antifa and Black Lives Matter cheering on, now I'm getting it. Pardon me. Okay. Now I'm actually getting into the next story. So let me, before I accidentally blend these two together, that is the Kyle Rittenhouse story. Now, let me get to Portland, Oregon, the more recent story. This came after Kyle's event in Kenosha. In Portland, Oregon, what I was trying to say was you had Antifa and Black Lives Matter protest groups cheering on the straight-up murder of a Trump supporter. And they didn't even, they weren't even trying to make a claim of self-defense at these rallies. These rioters, looters, just extreme violent protesters were saying that a fascist, a Nazi, a white supremacist had been killed, and that's all you needed to know, right? And so what were the actual facts of the case? There's breaking news last night that that the killer, Michael Reinholm, something like that, he was killed by police. It looks like a suicide by cop, honestly. This guy's a 48-year-old. What is a 48-year-old doing with a Black Lives Matter tattoo on his neck and being at these protests or, riots? The riots in Portland have been going on for 90 plus days, nearly 100 days. And what is this 48-year-old doing out there? In July, he was charged twice and let go. Once in a struggle with police, once with a loaded firearm on him. In another case, attacking another man for his firearm. But somehow all of these charges were dropped, and he was also street racing with his son, going over 100 miles per hour. All these charges just here in the summer. I don't even know if people have done the research to go way back, but this guy's like a real piece of work, and he is the one who pulls the trigger. He admits that he killed a man named Aaron Danielson. They call him Aaron J. Danielson. And it's in cold blood. It's on video. We don't know how calculated this was on some group collective level. Some people, I think, reasonably suspect that there could be a larger organization behind this killing. But effectively, this is Michael killing another man, Jay, and Michael runs from the scene. And it's clear in the video that there's no self-defense here. Someone identifies Jay and a friend as Trump supporters, and then a gun is pulled out. And before, this is nighttime, before the Trump supporters even know there's a gun on them, they're shot and killed. And, everyone's making excuses, trying to play all this context as if, this could have ever, been. They lean over backwards to make this look like a self-defense situation for Michael Reinholm. I don't even know if I'm saying that name right. Some German last name. And yet it's very clear they won't allow any iota of doubt for Kyle Rittenhouse and his presumption of innocence. So what happened last night? Yes, Michael is killed by police, effectively, I think, a shootout. I mean, we're still waiting for details, but it looks like, Michael wanted to die a martyr. He wanted to be a hero. He did an interview with Vice, and Vice was all the willing to put him out there as a hero. You can watch that online as well. What context am I missing here? I mean, the video, the police reports are out there for Kenosha, and the videos are out there for Portland, and we have these diametrically opposed events. One is clearly self-defense, one is clearly murder, and we're in such a state now where the exact opposite can be foisted on the American people in an election year. And that's just the nature of our society and of our institutions at this point. And we're going to get into why this is not isolated, and why we can look forward to really more of this. Unfortunately, people are going to keep going out to these protests now. Clearly you can tell from my analysis here who I think is more on the right. of the issue, who's more correct, who's more justified in self-defense violence. But you know what? No one should be going to these protests at all. I mean, protests shouldn't be happening. The whole issue is a non-issue, first of all. But then these Trumpers who think they're going in there and providing law and order, or even Kyle Rittenhouse, who I don't lump in quite as the same as the Trump crew that went into Portland 90 plus days after the rioting had been going on. The rioting had been going on there in Portland. Kyle at least was asked. Kyle had a specific purpose. Some property that he was hired to defend, or asked to defend. And so that's a little different, although, it's not worth it for Kyle now. Look at what's happening to him. Chances are he will not be convicted or go to jail for long. Maybe he'll get some minor charge on a gun issue, but I think even that could be appealed, and ultimately he could be fully acquitted of all charges, totally innocent. But nonetheless, all this trouble for what, right? For what? Something that's probably going to be burned down soon anyway, if it hasn't been already. So my overall point is that we have a lot more important work to do than going into these protests and trying to counter protest or whatever. I mean, you see the odds are stacked against you, and it's the time is much better spent really doing almost anything else. Just making sure I didn't miss any context here, but we do see. Just want to make another note of this Portland shooter guy. He's dead now, but he went on Vice and just made a complete. It's a family-oriented show, so you know what he did, but just a complete fool of himself. And he was saying that these Trump supporters that came into Portland, they were. They felt like it was the beginning of a war, he said. They made him feel as if he was in the beginning of a war. And why? Because, he didn't say this. I'm giving more credit now to the Portland murderer who's now dead. Maybe he felt like a war was being waged by people with paintball guns or mace. And I think some of the paintball guns and mace were probably overused. We got to see more video, and there's always more video you can see, but certainly people were just driving down the road legally as they're allowed, and maybe they had big Trump flag. Oh yeah, he said the big Trump flag meant, quote, they were out to get me. Does this sound like a reasonable person who is just out there, defending? Because he said I wasn't just going to stand there and let something happen to, he said his friend of color. Like he's some big white ally hero. So he decides he's just going to go pull a gun on a guy who was unarmed and just kill him. But he said, they're trying to make me look like a murderer. He said, I was confident that I didn't hit anyone innocent. So this Michael Reynolds guy, a real piece of work, doesn't even begin to make a case for self-defense. Really just creates this like grand vision of a war starting, and that he was, protecting someone against a future crime that we have no idea what would have happened. But if someone was getting maced that night, that meant that person was going to survive and not die. That's the worst case scenario. We don't even know. Really the full exchange of events. The mace went out just about the same time as the gunshots rang out in that event. But Michael doesn't even say that he fired the gun because the mace. Like, he doesn't even say that. So that too is giving him way more of a benefit of the doubt than even he's giving himself in this Vice interview. But thankfully we don't have to worry about him anymore. He's gone. But we should just take away from these episodes the lesson that more of this will happen, and it's safe to, I think, at least view those stories as they come out now through the lens of these events. Each case is a case-by-case basis, but if we use these two events as a lens for how the media is going to tell the rest of the story coming out on more violent interactions, because unfortunately we can only expect more violence leading up to the election and possibly into 2021, we just can't allow people to tell these lies anymore. And they tell them on Vice, they tell them on the mainstream media. And eventually when I get more technologically advanced here, maybe I can go over something in a more thorough way. I don't know if I would have graphics here or not on the screen. We'll figure that out. But okay, so what do we do about this if we're not going to go in the streets and fight it out and see who wins, right? Because no one's going to win if we do that. The purpose of this show is to promote community, is to promote family, is to promote tradition, is to promote formative institutions. And in a sense, some of this is relevant to the protests because the community that stands together will be safer than, say, just an individual who stands by themselves, or even one family that stands by themselves up against these people. We saw with the McCloskeys in St. Louis. It was nice that family, that couple, stood up for their home, and they probably saved themselves, some more trouble that day. Who knows? I mean, but the fact is that if violence is going to be answered as much as we cannot answer it with violence, okay? And it shouldn't just be allowed to run rampant. We have to answer it with something. We have to answer it with building, even as they are destroying. Even as they are destroying, it's not in vain for us to keep building. And I do believe part of that is building for victory for Trump 2020. And that's not to overshadow the more important work at home and in our communities, our churches, and the rest of that. And we will get into that. If not this episode, I'm running a little long, but in the future. But Trump 2020, this is not about creating some caricature of Trump, creating some mythic, hero of Trump, or that he's a perfect candidate in any way, shape, or form. But on some of the most important issues, the reason why I am supporting Trump, the reason why many libertarians are supporting Trump when we did not in 2016, are some of these. And let me run through these. Just yesterday, and this is under the issue of war, which might be the most important issue. Wars may not happen here in America, but they dictate the domestic policy. The foreign policy has subverted the domestic policy in the United States. So that's why I go to war first, for talking about broad-based coalitions and where the correct side of America's politics should be if we want to get back to a sense of what America is supposed to be. On the war front, Trump has promised to pull the troops out of Afghanistan. Why hasn't he done it yet? Why hasn't he done it already? There's a lot of excuses, and I'm not here to justify any excuses for Trump. He has a lot to answer for. But the fact is that he's nominated an ambassador to Afghanistan who has favored pulling all troops out of Afghanistan. And on the day of this news, what actual headline do we get? We get a story from years ago, 4 anonymous sources, not one named source, comes out and says, oh, Trump called the veterans jerks or losers or something like that. Trump said that if you're killed in a war, you're a loser. And so you see, Trump doesn't like the military. Trump's anti-military. Trump's, unpatriotic, whatever. And what is this story? This is a National Enquirer level story, I think, as I saw someone adeptly tweet out. But this story is false. We know it's false because John Bolton, a declared arch nemesis of Trump, wrote in his book that was so anti-Trump. He wrote in his book actually like what Trump was doing at the time that these charges are laid at Trump. So we know that this is all made up. But that's what you get. You get this news media reporting. 4 anonymous people years ago said that Trump said this, bad thing about the troops, that the troops are losers. I mean, can we be adults about this for a second instead of just clutching our pearls or feigning some indignant outrage about Trump calling the troops losers? I on my Facebook page, I was waiting for this because I have a lot of friends who are, in the military and actually resent either maybe their own military service or just, this admiration of the troops. That's very cartoonish that we've had for a long time. But someone commented in the comments, it was like, well, the veterans are losers. Like the veterans of the wars are losers. The troops are losers. What wars have they won? They're losers. And is that wrong to say? Is it like incorrect to say? Where's the lie? And of course, I agree. This is a family, America first kind of, show. So we're patriotic. We love, our, whatever. But it's like, it's true, right? The troops are losers. The army is a bunch of losers. But the reason why the military is a loser brigade is because the country is a loser. Like, America's a loser. Who's the loser in these wars? It's the entire country. The entire country pays for this and gets nothing in return. So the country is the loser in this. And so the fact that, like, they think that Americans are all going to be, clutching their pearls, just so outraged that Trump would call the troops losers. He didn't, first of all. It's a lie. But even if he did, Trump ran in 2016 on a lot of this stuff, that America is, not what it once was. And that was the whole point of Make America Great Again. So I just felt like this was obviously false when the news came out. And it comes out on the day that we're actually making progress in ending the war in Afghanistan. So that's how much the troops actually mean to the winners. If the losers are the country, who are the winners? The winners are these people who are not attached to this country at all, who are in the media, military, congressional industrial complex, this war party of interests that come together, and they're all against Trump, and they're all for Biden. And I think that's enough right there. That's enough right there to show a clear difference that we did not have between Bush and Gore, Bush and Kerry, Obama, McCain, Obama, Romney. There's actually a clear difference now, whereas before the war party didn't care who won. Maybe they had their preference, and maybe they leaned one way or the other and interfered in an election, but the war party wasn't going to really lose, until Trump came along. And they cannot believe that Trump won in 2016, and they're going against him harder than ever in 2020. Just something to keep in mind, that Hillary Clinton's old campaign manager, John Podesta, helped run this little strategy game, this little war game. As a matter of fact, they called it a war game for the election. And Podesta sat in for Biden. Who knows who sat in for Trump? I don't know. But they ran through this whole mock election, and in the end, Trump won the Electoral College vote, but lost the popular vote, just like in 2016. But this time what was different was the states that some states, in an unprecedented way, sent in electors to vote for the popular vote, regardless of how the Electoral College is supposed to work. So subverting the Electoral College, declaring Biden the winner, even though he wasn't. And then, the states would be like breaking off from the union over who the real president was, and the military would have to solve it. So, there's at least a theory out there that the Democratic Party would use the military to ensure its own political power. It uses the military to continue these wars abroad. And the Republican Party does this too, but in this sense, the Democratic Party is even more wholly owned than the Republican Party, because Trump is still apart from it to some degree. Not the same degree that he was in 2016, but it really is still significant. So the war party does not want you to vote for Trump. That's the fact. And libertarians or some peaceniks are going to vote third party. They'll vote Green Party or Libertarian Party, and that's your right. Go for it. I used to do that. 2004 to 2014, 2012. But in 2016, I left the ballot blank. I couldn't bring myself to vote for Trump, and now I have the courage to do that. Now that I've seen some of the progress that he's made on these issues. But Trump on abortion, on education, on just the quality of family life in the country, and and jobs, whatever faults he has on the economy on a wide scale, and surely he's been worse than Obama on the spending and the management of the Federal Reserve Bank. So I can go against Trump all day long. I'm better at being against Trump than anyone who says they're against Trump, and I'm actually voting for him. So I would encourage you, if you've been on the fence or you didn't vote for him in 2016, as I did not, to really consider who's lining up against Trump, and know that that's not insignificant, that it's not just, the Democrats and the Republicans are the same, and the only way we can make real progress is voting third party. No, the third party route is a protest vote, and you have your right to protest, but it's not having a choice in the election, especially in these more important swing states. And, so your one vote may or may not make it and make a big difference. Some of these precincts were off by just a couple of votes, so, in 2016. So your vote could really matter in some of these precincts. But more importantly, you should use your voice to grow the movement for Trump, to earn more votes for him. Because only then will we have time as a country to still have this conversation to work things out. I mean, Trump really has not been this dictator, like taking over Democrat strongholds or Democratic states. He's let them do their thing, and they're not going to let the red states do their thing. And that's kind of the beauty of America, is this decentralization, which we still have some figment of that still exists today. It's not what it used to be. It's not what it should be. But this is our chance to put Trump in office, buy ourselves some time, and to try and work our way out of this predicament instead of going in for an all-out war and hoping to win, because that's just not going to be good for anyone. I mean, you see that the Democrats have the numbers and the Republicans have the guns. This is a grand generalization, but it's essentially the truth. And it's just not a good mix. Like, there's no reason to do it that way anyway. There's no reason to pretend that this whole nation has to be, one nation indivisible. It really doesn't. It can be divisible. And that's I think, sort of the long game, is figuring out where do we redraw the lines so that we're better neighbors for each other and leaving each other alone where appropriate. And I think it's very important that Trump be reelected for those reasons. Not only the foreign policy, which will help us. I think Trump is making the right appointments. It's not just the ambassador to Afghanistan, but the ambassador to Germany as well. The ambassador to Germany is McGregor. The ambassador to Afghanistan is Ruger. Sorry, you do what you can, right? But look into these appointments Trump's making, and it's all showing vast improvement from early on in his presidency, when he was much more hawkish because he was under the wing of Reince Priebus and the RNC and all of this. And, he brought in John Bolton, fired John Bolton after a failed coup in Venezuela. And, Trump has bombed Syria after giving them a huge warning. So, it was sort of for show. And the mother of all bombs in Afghanistan, another big show of force. But Trump has really not gone full-throated into these wars like Hillary Clinton would have wanted to. Hillary was ready to start a war with Russia. Kamala and Biden are ready to pick that right up. So that needs to be front and center in the Trump campaign, honestly, and Trump needs to be more forward with his actions for sure. But that is so important, the foreign policy dictating the domestic policy, that people understand how that works, how the empire subverts the republic. And we really need to make the empire submit to the republic, if that makes sense. So that's the reason why I'm voting for Trump. I don't see it as a lesser than two evils kind of thing, because if I was choosing evil, that would be evil, and I can't do that. But I am voting for less abortion. I am voting for better protection for families, better education options for children to get out of this educational system in the United States. Maybe there's some good communities out there, and we should highlight those. But really, broadly speaking, it's not too much of a generalization to say the education system is what got us to this point. And we need to focus on getting our kids some real education outside of this compulsory, public school system that we have, into something more fitting for a free and peaceful and prosperous society. So on the family level, on the country level, on the peace level abroad, it's Trump. It's just, there's no choice. It's Trump, and I'm voting for those things. I'm voting for those good things. Now, a lot of bad things will come of Trump 2020. Shock. Okay? A lot of bad things would come of any president. There's no president that would be a perfect president. Okay? And if people want to pretend there is, they're welcome to debate me. But we're running up on 40 minutes here. I wanted to keep the show around half an hour, so I'm learning to cut things down a little shorter. enough. Just to wrap up here, I just encourage you to go look at these arrest videos in the UK, in Australia. In Australia, you have a pregnant 28-year-old mother who all she did was post that she wanted a peaceful protest. In Australia, if you don't know, it's one of the worst lockdowns in the world. Now, there's some areas that are in stage 4 lockdown, which is just total house arrest. In this community that she's in, it was stage 3, where you're allowed to go out in pairs. No more than 2 people can leave their home together or meet up at a time. So she's calling for a peaceful protest, social distancing, wear your mask unless you have a medical reason not to, which some people will see as sort of an out. But nonetheless, I mean, she says wear a mask, social distance, and peaceful protest, and let's, be against this lockdown and show that we're against it because we live in a free country, human rights, yada, yada. There's really nothing nefarious here at all. There's nothing like, we're going to make them pay, we're going to show them. There's no even like mildly threatening language here at all. 28-year-old pregnant mother puts this up on Facebook, and the police, a whole squad of police, like at least 4 police officers, show up at her door and confiscate all of her electronics, all of her husband's electronics, all of her sister's electronics. Whoever is in the house, they claim all of their electronic devices and haul them all away, arrest her and haul her away just for this simple Facebook post. The protest hadn't even happened yet. And, worse than this, more sickening than this sort of enforcement of these phony lockdowns, which don't really make a difference in the spread of COVID-19. Worse than these lockdowns and the enforcement of them, the inhumane treatment of people, is really the online reactions. I see a lot of laugh reactions on Facebook at this, where people are just like, well, serves her right. And I just see, again, people view their family, their real family, as the state, as the government. And their community or their actual family members are not their family. Now they've latched onto the state, and it's because we've been eroding away at these institutions, eroding away at these mediating social organizations that help the individual relate to the state in a healthy way. And that is where America got away from itself. That's why when I say Come Home America, I name this show Come Home America. It starts in the home. As I say, it starts with the education of young people. But the home branches out to the community, the church, and whatever other organizations. And we see those organizations and those mediating institutions coming under attack, in the discourse for the sake of winning a culture war. Well, I should wrap it up there. That's about it for today. We will have more news this Sunday, I believe. I'm going to try and do 2 shows a week and see how that goes. Maybe do more in the future, but at least 2 shows a week. So thank you so much. If you go to nickhankoff.com, you can sign up for a mailing list. Eventually, I'll get a newsletter out there. This is all very early, so you're on the ground floor getting in there. Please like, comment, subscribe, share. What else? Just share everywhere. Sharing's the best. So share, and I really appreciate your support. It really invigorates me every single time I see that because we're so early on here. Eventually, when I have like 1 million viewers every night, I will not care about any of the viewers except for you, because I'll remember you from the beginning. Okay, so thank you for the support. God bless you. This has been episode 4 of Come Home America with Nick Hankoff. Have a good one.